For decades, Cliff Richard was a huge figure in pop music, a living legend whose presence was impossible to ignore. Known as the United Kingdom's answer to Elvis Presley, he sold millions of records, filled stadiums, and carved out a place for himself as one of Britain's most lasting and talented performers. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, he faded from public view. No grand farewell tour, no headline, making retirement just a quiet disappearance. Fans were left asking, what happened to Cliff Richard? Why did he vanish from the spotlight? Now, with time offering a broader view of his choices and the circumstances surrounding his departure from public life, the pieces begin to fall into place, and the truth is more complex and more human than many expected. The amazing rise of a British fish. I can't to understand Cliff Richard's disappearance. We have to appreciate just how brightly he once shined. His rise began in the late 1950s when he burst onto the scene with his hit Move It. At the time, he was something new, a British teen idol with a rock and roll edge, while most of the UK's pop scene was playing catch-up with American imports. Cliff proved that a homegrown star could be just as exciting. Throughout the 1960s, he became a cultural mainstay. Hit after hit followed. He starred in films, performed for royalty, and built a loyal fan base that spanned generations. Unlike many of his peers, Cliff evolved with the times, shifting from rock to pop gospel, even a touch of disco. During the 70s and 80s, his image was clean, his performances polished, and his name synonymous with staying power and professionalism. But that's perfection, it turns out, came at a cost. The cost of constant spotlight. For someone who spent over 5 decades in the public eye, it's easy to assume that Cliff Richard thrived on attention, and perhaps for a time he did, but years of constant touring, media obligations, album deadlines, and the never-ending scrutiny that comes with fame took their toll. Unlike celebrities who burn out, young Cliff kept going, often outlasting entire generations of fellow performers, but keeping a squeaky clean image for over 50 years, especially in the cutthroat world of entertainment, is no small feat. Every move, every word, every relationship was examined, picked apart, and judged. The pressure to be flawless became a burden. At some point, that weight became too much. Behind the stage lights and interviews, Cliff Richard was still a man, a human being, looking for peace, privacy, and authenticity. That in many ways is where the story of his vanishing begins. Scandal, scrutiny, and the shattering of trust. One of the most significant reasons for Cliff's retreat from public life was the intense media scrutiny that surrounded him later in his career. After decades of being seen as the golden boy of British pop, he suddenly found himself thrust into controversy through no fault of his own. Although never charged or convicted of any crime, the experience of being publicly associated with scandal was deeply damaging. His name, reputation, and sense of security were all shaken. For someone who had carefully maintained a positive public image for so long, the fallout was especially cruel. The ordeal not only affected his career, it also wounded his spirit. He became more reclusive, more guarded, and understandably mistrustful of the media that once celebrated him. The damage was done even if the accusations were ultimately unfounded. It was in many ways the tipping point. A man who had once been inseparable from the spotlight began to recoil from it, seeking solitude and sanctuary. In the years that followed, Cliff Richard began stepping away from the limelight. He stopped appearing regularly on television. His once routine tours became rarer. Public appearances dwindled. He turned his attention to places that brought him peace, private homes, quiet retreats, spiritual pursuits. For much of his later life, he found comfort in his faith and in simple routines. Away from fame, he focused on maintaining his health, nurturing close relationships, and enjoying the life he had worked so hard to build. More than once, he hinted in interviews that he was tired of fame's double-edged sword. Being a household name brought him wealth and adoration, yes, but also loneliness, invasion of privacy, and at times a sense of being imprisoned by expectations. as he aged. Cliff began to prioritize himself rather than burn out publicly. He slowly exited the stage, leaving behind a void that fans continued to question, but which he quietly embraced. A life without apology. Cliff Richard's retreat from the spotlight wasn't a scandalous implosion or a dramatic meltdown. It was a slow, deliberate step away from the noise. Unlike many stars who cling to relevance, he accepted that his era had passed, and he was at peace with it. He didn't need another #1 hit to validate his career. He didn't need paparazzi to remind him that he mattered. He had already achieved everything a performer could hope for: chart topping success, longevity, international acclaim, and generational influence. What he needed more than anything was to live life on his own terms, away from the demands of the industry, away from speculation, away from cameras. And that's exactly what he did. The final bow that never came. Some stars announce retirement with a grand farewell concert. Others write memoirs or release his final albums as parting gifts to their fans. Cliff Richard did none of that. Not really. His disappearance wasn't packaged as a media event. It was quiet and personal. That quietness, ironically, made it louder. Fans noticed whispers, started people, assumed the worst. Was he ill? Did he lose interest? Was he bitter? But the truth is more ordinary and in some ways more inspiring. Cliff Richard didn't disappear because he failed. He disappeared because he succeeded. He got what he wanted. A life lived fully and finally in peace. Legacy cemented, not forgotten. Today, Cliff Richard's music still plays on classic stations. His name is still referenced with respect, and for those who grew up with his music, he remains a symbol of an era, timeless, reliable, enduring. His disappearance doesn't erase his contributions. If anything, it preserves them by stepping away when he did. Cliff Richard ensured that his legacy remained intact. He didn't overstay his welcome. He left the stage with grace. In the modern age, where some stars will do anything to stay relevant, Cliff's quiet exit feels like a rare kind of dignity. He didn't vanish because he was forced to. He vanished because he chose to. The power of walking away. There's something powerful about knowing when to leave. Cliff Richard understood this. After decades of chasing chart positions and pleasing crowds, he decided to listen to a quieter voice, his own. And what did that voice say? That it was time to rest, time to stop performing for the world, time to enjoy the simple pleasures of life: meals with friends, sunsets on the beach, maybe even silence. Not many celebrities choose peace over praise, but Cliff Richard did, and in doing so, he may have taught his fans a final unspoken lesson: that there is more to life than applause. Where is he now? While he no longer graces magazine covers or headlines concert tours, Cliff Richard hasn't completely vanished. Every now and then, he reappears through special interviews, rare performances, or messages to fans. He still sings on occasion. He still smiles. He still seems to carry that quiet charisma that made him beloved in the first place. But he doesn't need the spotlight anymore, and maybe he never really did. Conclusion: the man behind the music, Cliff Richard, didn't just vanish. He evolved. He withdrew with intention, not desperation. Okay? His disappearance wasn't about scandal, failure, or fading relevance. Okay? It was about liberation. He gave the world his music, his energy, and his heart for over 50 years. In return, all he wanted was space to be himself. No expectations, numbers, no stage. And now, with the dust of decades behind him, we finally understand why Cliff Richard stepped away from the spotlight. Because after giving everything to the world, he decided to keep the rest for himself.